Now Monday, pond liner has arrived, and today's target is to get the excavation fully prepped, all the roots and sharp bits and pieces trimmed off, pond liner put in and some water put in so we actually have a pond. And for the time being, I'm doing some of the behind the scenes stuff that you don't generally see, and that's mucking about with all this camera equipment, batteries and cables, rigging up my little time-lapse camera, the main camera that I'm recording on, and a little backup camera as well. It always takes me a lot of time in the mornings trying to get this stuff sorted. Now, in preparation of getting the pond liner put in the excavation, I'm just filling up one of my little pop-up onion tanks. It's really handy for me to get a reserve of water so that I can put the pond liner in the pond, and then I can pump a large volume of water into the pond very quickly to get that liner to sit down. If I didn't have this, I'd be sat in the pond waiting for the hose to fill it up, twiddling my thumbs, taking an awful long time. So this is a really, really good time-saving exercise, and these pop-up tanks are very, very handy. Nice and portable. The whole thing is just held in place with a couple of these kids' flexible noodles or floats, and up it goes. And this tank holds about 500 gallons, 2,500 litres. Now, as yet, we've still not had any rain. So, over the weekend, the owners have been spraying around the pond, particularly the edging and the vegetation here, just to make sure that it's still alive, because it would have dried out by now. Oh, you always end up finding little newts and frogs and things that have worked their way and hidden underneath the pond liner. Again, look at this chap. Really dry. Looks very much like a lizard. Go and put him in the undergrowth. Oh, look at his tummy. Now, keeping that pond liner over the top of this has made sure that none of this is dried out. Nice and soft, no cracks at all, and kept its shape nicely. So what's next? Well, a lot of people would now just plonk the liner in and get the pond filled up and call it job done. But that's not the thing to do. And as always, it's always the unseen work, the preparation, particularly that goes into the ground, which is the most important part, and is going to make this pond a durable feature that's going to last for many years to come. So the most important thing now is to make sure that we check the ground entirely for anything sharp, anything that might damage the pond liner, and make a little bit of effort in just doing some ground preparation first of all. So I am going to spend a little bit of time running my hands over all of the shelves. If I feel anything sharp, anything that gets in the way, roots, I'll give it a snip. Stones, I'll dig out or I'll whack in and tamp in. And then we'll go over the whole excavation with a tamp, just a heavy object, and compact the ground down. And the best way of doing this really is just to run your hands over the ground rather than trying to visually spot anything that's going to cause a problem. The midges are back biting my head, so hat goes back on. Right, it's pond fleece time now. Spent a little time looking for stones and roots and bits and pieces. It wasn't too bad. I'd already done a pretty decent job during the digging, but there was a few bits and pieces that I've played around with and moved. I did find a little rodent's nest caught up in the side here. It was very, very hollow, and when I sort of pulled away some of the earth, there was a lot of leaves and moss and bits and pieces. Thankfully, there were no babies in there, so they're gonna have to find somewhere else, I'm afraid, but I've put some soil back in there and compacted all that back up again. So now I'm using this Gordon Low pond specific geotextile fabric. This is a really, really finely, densely woven rock-proof fabric designed to last the length of the pond lining. Pond liner is only as good as the ground preparation. It's pointless buying a good quality, thick, heavy-duty rubber lining if you're not going to then put the effort in preparing the ground as well. So essential that you put some fleece down. Some people might put some sand down as well, or instead of fleece. I definitely wouldn't use it instead of fleece, but an addition of sand, if it's quite stony, could be quite beneficial, and then a layer of fleece on top of that. But here it's predominantly kind of clay. There's not very many stones, so I'm just going to use the fleece. Now this stuff is pretty difficult to cut. You need a nice sharp pair of scissors. Got my special scissors here that I use. And I'm just gonna put layers of this fleece down in sections, drop down into the middle, and then probably cut a section for the centerpiece here as well. Can be a bit awkward on your own, especially on a windy day, but it's nice and still today. And again, I can't emphasize enough the importance of this. And don't scrimp on it. Put 2 or 3 layers if you can afford to. There's a couple of different thicknesses available on the market. This is the heavier duty, what's called a 250 GSM, or 250 gram per square meter fabric. It's available in white and more recently in this black. I much prefer using the black. On a hot sunny day, the white can get very reflective, especially when you're working in a big pond. You need sunglasses, you end up with snow blindness. So I've got a nice layer of pond fleece in the excavation, and the next job is to get the pond liner in. Now this is a 1mm heavy duty, it was once called Firestone rubber, it's now called Pond Guard, but it's the same product, a nice heavy duty rubber lining, comes with, call it a lifetime warranty. I mean, let's be honest, the warranty of these sorts of things is not really worth the paper it's written on. It's not going to be guaranteed against physical damage like punctures, animals, rodents chewing, which is realistically the only thing that's really going to damage a pond liner. The integrity of the hot welds on the lining is essentially what the guarantee is for, and for the durability of the material itself. But if a pond liner is put in well, you'll never need to use that guarantee. Now, 6x10 was what I had measured. There isn't an off-the-shelf or even a roll of that particular size, so it's a little bit bigger. Obviously, you never want to go smaller. So this one is 4.88 by 6.10. I don't know which way it's been cut off of a roll and then rolled up. So before I stick it in the pond, I'm just going to open it out on the lawn here, just so I can orientate myself and know which way is the 6 metre and which way is the 4. You'd like to think that it's been rolled up on the longest length, but that's not always the case. Even this small piece of liner is heavy. This weighs nearly 40 kilos. Now obviously be careful when you're manhandling a roll of liner like this. It's very easy if you pick it up and you stand it upright vertically. Oh, the hose has just popped out, hang on a sec. I just had to rescue the hose which had fallen out of the reservoir. Right, so when you're manhandling rolls of liner like this, you've got to be careful, particularly as they're heavy. If you're standing this upright and you're putting it on rough ground, you've got to be very careful not to potentially damage or puncture one of these folds here, one of these creases. And of course you wouldn't know that you've done so until you open up the pond liner, and somewhere in the middle of the lining is going to be a small hole. So don't go dragging it across the ground or do anything rough or abrasive with it. Likewise here, I'm opening it up very carefully on the lawn. I'm not going to pull it or drag it about, because again, when the liner gets hot, very stretchy, it's very easy to puncture, and then those punctures can tear alarmingly. So I'm just going to unroll it very carefully, get an idea of the length or the width, and then roll it back up again. Good. I can see that's been rolled up on its longest point, so I roll that back up again now. Now of course when you use a flexible pond liner, there are always going to be creases. It would be impossible to do it crease free, but there are techniques that you can do to minimise creases and to make the liner look nice and neat. And again, it's really important to try and do this at this stage. Once you've got water in the pond, it's too late, you're going to have to empty it and do it again. I think the most important thing primarily when you're laying a pond liner is to not try and get the liner to fit neatly dry at this stage. Instead, you want to open it up, try and orientate the fold lines so that you've got nice straight lines running across the length of the pond or across the width of the pond, so you can make sure that the liner has been sort of fitted evenly across the whole excavation, that you've got equal overlap all the way around the pond. And then you want to open it up so that it's not touching the base of the pond. I can get some water in the pond now. and that weight is going to pull the pond liner down, and that ensures that the base, the flat surface of the pond, has a good start, and that liner is nice and flat. And then as the pond starts to fill, I can start to manipulate and create nice neat folds in certain places, which when the pond is full, the weight of the water is going to hold those folds back nice and neatly. So this is really important at this stage, to just open up the liner fully like this. Now the thicker the pond liner, of course, the harder it is to lay neatly, especially if the pond is quite an awkward shape with lots of curves and bends. Obviously a square or rectangle being the easiest. Right, that'll do. So now I'm going to get some water in here. So I'm just rigging up my pump, which I'll drop into the holding tank, and then we'll start pumping out a bit of water and get that pond liner pulled down. Didn't take very long to fill this actually, but still, it's much more convenient having a large collection of water now that I can pump in, rather than just waiting for the hose to fill it. So this is what it looked like when I've got my head cam on. Very fetching, isn't it? I wanted to show you though how I manipulate the pond liner, how I create the folds to try and get this liner put in neatly, and this is the best way to do that. Right, I'm going to stop here, pull the pump out because it's actually siphoning rather than pumping at the moment. I didn't want it coming out too forcefully, and I'm going to start to create some of the folds and then get some more water in here. And that's never good. The end of my pump's just fallen off. So on these inner curves, and I hope you can see this properly with the camera on my head, you can see where already the liner is naturally starting to form these creases. And it's here where I'm going to kind of encourage the liner to sit down a little bit more neatly. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a bit of a gather. So I'm going to sort of create a fold one way and a fold the other way, and then we've kind of got this triangular fold of liner which is going to end up following the contours of the pond all the way to the outer edge. If anybody watching does do sewing or seamstressing, if that is even a thing, tell me if I'm correct and that is the proper term, that it's called a gather. Right, that's one. And when this is filled and we've got the weight of the water on here, that is going to look an awful lot more discreet and a lot tidier than just having random creases and folds all over the place. So now the pond is nearly full and I can see the extent of exactly how much overlap I've got, and I can confirm that the pond liner has gone in properly and there's enough overlap all the way around the perimeter of the pond. You know, sometimes you do this and as the pond liner gets pulled down you might not have quite enough overlap on one side. This is about as little as I'd want here, but that's ideal. But if it wasn't quite right, I'd have to drain it, move the liner and then refill it again. So I'm now going to give this a cursory trim. I'm not going to go too mad, but I just want to get rid of the main overlap. There's obviously a lot of excess in the smaller areas of the pond, so I'm going to get rid of those. Making sure that I'm giving a very generous cut here in case I had to drain it or do anything else. I don't want to cut it too short. So that just helps to clear up around the pond and give me a better idea of where all of the edges and the boundaries are. And these offcuts, they won't go to waste. I'll open this up and I'll start to trim up some of this into little sections that can be used to protect the main pond liner. If any stones are going to go on it, any baskets that are going to sit on the pond, we can put an extra layer down, so it's all useful stuff. So I've just had a little visit over to Lindsay Clark's in Churt. If your local sort of Hampshire Surrey area, it's a fantastic little landscaping centre, Lindsay Clark's, really helpful chaps there, and they've always got a nice supply of materials. So I've just picked up a little batch of some York natural walling. I love York stone, it's a nice material to use, it's very easy to split and to manipulate, and it's available in sort of chunkier rockery pieces and thinner pieces that make great walling and nice paving. I think it's a lovely natural kind of warm colour, works very nicely with water and ponds and very nicely with plants and vegetation, so it's pretty much my rock of choice. But it is always very dusty when you pick it up, so it needs a good clean before I can put it in the pond and before I can lay it on a bed of mortar. So a jet wash or a hose and a brush and get all of that muck off. So all the stonework has been washed and I've just laid it out around the pond so I can gauge kind of quantities and get an idea of the shapes. I've chopped the level of the pond down a little bit so I've got access to that shelf. So all my prep work is done. So now it's time to start mixing up a little bit of mortar and get some of this stonework laid. Now I'm using my sort of go-to general mix, which is a 4-to-1 mix, 2 parts sharp sand, 2 parts soft sand to 1 part cement. A little bit of plasticizer mixed up with the water as well, which helps to make the mortar a little bit more workable and gives it a little bit more frost proof. Just using my little trusty miniature shovel as a gauge. Now when I'm knocking up small amounts like this, I don't bother getting a cement mixer out. Using a paddle mixer is so much more convenient. I can mix it directly into the container and then carry it around the pond. And there's a lot less to clean afterwards as well. Right, I'll get that dry mixed and then I'll add a little bit of the liquid. What a lovely afternoon it's turned out to be. Sadly, it's going to be short-lived because I think tomorrow the weather's going to turn, so I better make the most of it for today. But I've just been going around folding back all of the turf and the vegetation and just giving it kind of a cursory tamp down. This is not the finished look, but I just wanted to get an idea of levels and how much vegetation I actually had to be able to conceal the liner. And I'll then go back round with some loose soil and start to pack some of the gaps and bits and pieces. But that's working nicely to hide that overlap of pond lining. And then over here, this section, which is going to become the natural overflow, I'm going to use all of these lovely paddle stones, these slate paddle stones that were in the bottom of the pond. These are lovely stones, natural sort of water worn, cool paddle stones because they're the shape of a paddle, funnily enough, but they're far too good not to use. And being nice and flat like this, they're less inclined to roll into the pond like a cobble or a pebble. So these are just going to get laid dry over this area. It's amazing how quickly jobs like this come together. Now I've finished all of that stonework and the cementing, this side of things is a lot quicker. It won't be long before I can get onto the planting, which is the fun bit. I've just gone around and given the pond liner another trim as well to reduce the overlap a little bit more, and I've made sure that the underlay is slightly bigger than the liner itself so that I can roll this down a little bit, get it into the position I want, and then hold it in place with the turf, the vegetation, or with a few rocks. And that piece of fleece there is going to help to protect the liner. I've got offcuts of liner as well if I need to provide additional protection. But it's also going to help to create a nice damp, moist environment, which is going to draw water to the surrounding vegetation to make sure that all of this is moist and will grow. Right, I've got another few buckets of these stones, so I'll put them to good use somewhere. So we are coming towards the end of this job, and true to form, as always seems to happen, the weather has turned and gone is the lovely sunshine, and we are now getting a bit of rain and drizzle. Although, to be fair, the garden does need it. It's very dry, and it is going to help to keep this turf and vegetation around the pond looking a little bit greener. So I've just been going around filling all of the gaps and voids between the stonework here and trimming away all of the pond liner and the fleece. And it's little jobs like that where you start to conceal all the man-made materials, where the job really starts to look almost complete. I've got a little area here to finish off, and then I want to partially drain the pond down and use the vacuum just to pick up some of the soil and the detritus that's sort of fallen in onto this shelf, giving it a bit of a clean. And then we can finally get some water back up to its level. Then the last job to do on this is to get some plants in. So we're drawing to the end of this job now, and the final job to do is to introduce some plants into the pond. Now, because this is a static, essentially a wildlife pond, we're relying on plants here to try and create good conditions in the pond to outcompete algae and blanket weed, and to try and keep the pond clean and oxygenated. Most importantly here is diversity. We want to introduce lots of different species of plants to try and encourage lots of different types of wildlife to the pond. So I've got a large selection here of different varieties of plants I'm going to introduce. So starting for the oxygenating weed, we've got some Potamogetum crispus, or curly leaf pondweed, some water milfoil, Myriophyllum spicatum. We've got some deep water marginals here, a bit like a water lily. This is called Nymphoides peltata, or fringed heart water lily, and this is a nice plant that will grow down from the depths of the pond and then have some floating leaves at the surface. We've got some evergreen foliage here. It doesn't look very much at the moment, but when it grows it looks nice. This is Equisetum japonicum, a variety of aquatic horsetail. And then we've also got a dwarf variety of this over here. This one is Equisetum scapoides. That's a nice one you don't get to see very often. Nice little dwarf evergreen grass. We've got some Orontium golden club just coming into flower here as well. Again, another deep water marginal. This can go quite deep, 12 inches of water above the basket, and it'll have these nice sort of shuttlecock-like growth of foliage above the water. We've got 4 different types of iris. We've got some Iris lavigata snowdrift just coming into flower now with some white blooms, and then we've got some traditional Iris lavigata, which is the purple. We've got an Iris pseudochorus cultivar, a dwarf yellow iris here, and then we've got some purple American flag iris, which is Iris versicolor. All of these are nice small irises that are going to be appropriate to the size of the pond. We've got some more evergreen foliage here with a variety of Acorus, sweet scented flag. We've got some of my favourites here, Pondateria, pickerel weed. These are nice late flowering plants, only just coming into leaf now. Little purple spikes of flower, sort of July onwards for the rest of the year. Last but not least, we've got some marsh marigold here, Caltha palustris. And this is finished flowering, it's one of the earliest flowering plants in ponds, but it's nice to have for next season. So let's get these into some baskets. We're using just some traditional mesh plastic baskets. I'm not a huge fan of using plastic in ponds. I'd much rather have dedicated planting zones that we can plant these plants bare rooted into. But I'm not building this pond, I'm just relining it. We're utilising the shelves that's there, so we are using baskets. We've got some different shaped baskets here, some squares and some contour baskets, which work really nicely with curved ponds. And we're just using a 10mm gravel, 10mm shingle as the planting medium. We're not using any aquatic soil, and that means that we don't have to line the baskets with any hessian or foam squares. We can just put gravel directly into the basket, and gravel works very well as a sort of a heavy medium. It's going to act as a ballast to keep the plant weighted down into the pond. If it gets quite top heavy, it's going to help to stop it from blowing over. Now, gravel obviously has got little to no nutrient content. If it was a pond with fish, the waste the fish produce is going to provide nutrients to get the plants going. But as this is a wildlife pond and we haven't got any fish in there, I'm just going to give the plants a little head start with some slow release plant fertiliser tablets. This is NT Life tablet plant food. Lots of other varieties available, I'm sure. And I'll just simply scatter a couple of these tablets in amongst the base of the baskets with the plants, just to give them a bit of a head start. Now this gravel is very, very dirty. It'll need a good clean and a good rinse before I put them in the pond. So I'll get these planted up and then I'll just trickle water over the top of the basket and let some of that muck leach through. Let's do a couple of baskets of pickerel. I'll probably end up doing a few mixed baskets as well. And I just want to make sure that these aren't too deep down in the gravel. I'll give them a gentle tug, just bring them slightly closer to the surface, but make sure they're still well anchored. And there we go, simple as that. That's one basket. Got many more to go. This Iris labiata snowdrift is a lovely plant. Don't often see it. It's got some lovely, great big blooms, white petals with this sort of mauve veins. Very nice. Although I do always think that the Latin name Iris labiata is like something out of Harry Potter. Labiata! I think I've actually lucked out with the weather today. I said yesterday it normally rains on the last day of these jobs, but today looks like it's going to be all right. Now with the irises, if you're not sure about what colour the flowers are going to be, quite often you get a good indication by the colour of the stems once you peel away some of the older growth. So this is the purple American flag iris, Iris versicolor, and you can see here it's got a nice sort of purple mauve stem. That indicates that that's going to be purple flowering. With the pseudochorus, or the yellow cultivar, you can see here that it's a much, much paler stem. So although not 100% accurate, it does give you a good indication as to the colour that the flower of the iris is going to be. Now you might ask, why gravel and not aquatic soil? Really, it comes down to cost and mess. Aquatic soil now is about 8 or 9 quid for a bag. Doesn't go very far. And you have to then line the basket to stop it from leaching out. And because aquatic compost is by its very nature low nutrient, there are lots of other ways of planting up aquatic plants quite successfully, which is an awful lot cheaper. This is taking forever. So, this is a lovely little number, this one. Nymphoides peltata, fringe tart water lily. Not a true water lily, but reminiscent because it has floating miniature pads at the surface. If you're after a dwarf water lily, but the pond's in slightly shady conditions, this is a really good alternative. Now it can get quite sort of thuggy and end up taking over if the conditions are right. It forms these long runners, and from this arterial runner here you'll get lots of little nodules of new growth, and then these pads break in the surface. But you can just pull it out if it gets too much. It has little yellow buttercup-like flowers. They're not as fancy or attractive as water lily flowers, but they're nice in their own way. Damselflies particularly enjoy sitting on the pads of these and laying their eggs. Right, we've got another basket of that to do, and then we've got to tackle the weed here. Now I'm not going to pot that on. Instead, I'm going to use some little lead substitute ties and put one of these little metal ties, weighted ties, around each one of these clumps of weed, and that will hold it together, and it will help to keep it anchored and keep it down at the bottom of the pond. I don't want to squeeze this too tight. I don't want to crush the stems or bruise the stems, because it'll just end up breaking away and bits of the weed will float to the surface. But that's all I'll do with this. It's a little tie. I'll probably put a couple around here, and then that'll just get thrown in. That took a little bit longer than expected, but we've created a lot of baskets. That's going to have a nice impact on this pond. It's time to give all this gravel a bit of a rinse. Let's get these in the pond. Now, despite rinsing the gravel through, there's still going to be puffs of mucky water coming out of the baskets. That's normal, and that will settle and clear, so nothing to be worried about there. Now, this pond is in quite a shady position, and one of the reasons why I wanted to have such a mix of varieties of plants is so that we can find something that's really going to do well in these conditions. Water lilies, for example, would prefer to have a sunnier pond than this. I mean, it does get some afternoon sun, but the lilies are never going to thrive and flower quite as profusely as they would do in a sunny position. Make sure that the water lily is kept in the sunniest position. It's nice to get in the pond and actually have some depth to it. You know, when we started this job, you could have walked in here in wellies. And last but not least, we'll put in the bunches of oxygenating weed. There we go. So it's going to take a little while for these plants to actually start to establish themselves. Initially, they look a little bit lame, a little bit floppy, but they'll soon right themselves. 4 or 5 weeks' time, there'll be some new foliage. Obviously, the irises, they get trimmed back down when I'm potting them like this, so that they can establish some good roots rather than their foliage. It's important that we don't want to have too much leaf on the irises, which can get quite top heavy, because the wind's going to catch them and knock them about in the basket. So they need to establish that good root base first. Bit of tidying up to do. Duckweed. There's duckweed in here. There was duckweed in here before. We're never going to get rid of it entirely. And again, in a wild natural pond like this, there's a certain amount of benefit to be had from the native duckweed plant, but it's a bit unsightly and it can take over if left to its own devices. So I will give this a good skim now to try and get rid of as much of it as I can. I've got to introduce a couple of treatments to the pond, an anti-blanket weed treatment just to help to discourage blanket weed, which is inevitably going to grow from all the tap water that's gone into this. And a filter aid, a biological additive, just to give the pond a bit of a kickstart to get it going. But other than that, this is finished. And how nice to finish on a dry day. So there we go, job done. I hope you've enjoyed watching this process. This was a pretty simple pond that needed a little bit of TLC to rejuvenate it and give it some life back, and it hasn't taken very long to make it into a focal point and a feature in the garden. Something as simple as this could be tackled by anybody. If you're not too confident in using mortar and cementing the stonework, this could be laid dry. Everything else is done very simply. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Ed from Crystal Clear Aquatics. I'll see you in the next pond.